Okay, good evening to you. Can you hear me okay? Good. I'm one of those people that have more fun than most people are supposed to. And you get to know me, you'll find that out. How many of you heard about Clifford and Bessie May? He was a lot older than she was, and they got married. Her mother didn't want her daughter to marry him because he's so much older. And after they were married, they just fell into a state of arguing all the time. If you had the windows up on a summer night, you could hear voices long into the night arguing. And Clifford said one night, he said, "Bessie, if I die before you do, I'm coming back. And I'm going to make you wish you'd never been born." Well, he died at the ripe old age of 96. And so her parents were worried about that. They said, "Do you think he could do that?" And Bessie said, "You don't have to worry about it. I've taken care of it." First of all, she said two things. She said, "I buried him face down." Secondly, she said, "I know him. He's too proud to ask directions. So he won't be coming back." And then one more thing I'll mention. And this is, whenever you go to the polls, you want to remember this. Little girl said, Mama, I want to know, do all fairy tales start with once upon a time? Her mother said, "No, honey, we have an outbreak of fairy tales every 2 years in this country. Fairy tales today start with, if I am elected." So you remember that when you vote now. Okay. We will look at Matthew 24:3 in a little bit as a place to start. But I want to mention some things before I get to there and give you a little foundation for some things. The Bible's an amazing book. I believe the Bible to be true because of scientific facts, because of principles that work when applied, because of the alignment of nations, things that were predicted about nations and what they would do and when. But one of the greatest reasons is prophetic truth, prophecy. And we get to looking at this thing of prophecy, you'll find it is a blessing to study, the Bible said in Revelation 1:3, and to observe the sayings of this book. It's a transforming truth. 1 John 3:3, if he hath this hope in himself, any man hath this hope in himself, he purifieth himself even as he is pure. So 109 predictions about the life of Jesus, 25 of which was fulfilled on the day of the crucifixion. There are 1,817 distinct predictions in the Bible. And the word prophecy is used, or prophet is used 242 times. Prophets, 239 times. 21 times the word prophecy is used, and 8 times the word prophetess is used. In other words, a female. And you might say, why should the Lord come? Why do we need him to come? Well, the Lord's return is going to be very important because it's going to do lots of things. It's the only way to restore desolate cities. The only way to get rid of evil nations. Matthew 25 is the judgment of nations. You hardly ever hear that subject dealt with. The way to get rid of the devil, because the devil's going to be in the bottomless pit during the 1,000-year reign on earth while Christ is reigning on earth. It's the only way to return the earth to its fruitfulness. by lifting the curse off the earth when the Lord sets up his millennial reign. Find that in Amos 9:13. The people who are planting the crops are telling the ones who are gathering it, hurry up and get this out of the way so we can plant the crops. The abundance and yield was so great that they were all this time gathering and gathering and gathering and gathering. But we've never seen a world where the curse was lifted, and it'll be amazing what it does and what it's like. One way to get it'd be the way we get our new bodies, the Lord coming. Lots of good things. So we come to Matthew 24 and verse 3. Jesus setting up on the Mount of Olives. And he makes some predictions there, and disciples come to him, and they start asking him questions. And he's going to give a schedule of some things that's very interesting. Before I get all together into that, let me ask you one more thing. What is prophecy? 8 things. It's the message of the hour because it's the hour of its fulfillment. It's history written in advance. It is the testimony of Jesus. Revelation 19 and verse 10. The testimony of Jesus, the spirit of prophecy. It is the light that shines in a dark place. 2 Peter 1:19. It is related to important doctrine, like the Lord's Supper, which says you do show his death till he come. It keeps you pure. Like I said, 1 John 3:3, he that hath the hope in himself, purify himself. That's the hope of his coming, even as he is pure. If you believe Jesus was coming real shortly, you would very possibly and very likely live a cleaner life. The best proof, prophecy is the best proof of the Bible being true. Now, we'll look tonight at signs that have been fulfilled in our lifetime. We don't have to go way, way back. We'll show you things that's taken place in our lifetime. Probably the most important thing is to go back to the 40s and see how things come together after World War II. After World War II, the UN was formed. This lays a foundation for a one-world government. And the National Council of Churches was developed. That lays the foundation for a one-world religion. There's going to be a world religion during the first half of the tribulation. The 17th chapter of Revelation is different than the 18th chapter. The 17th chapter is about ecclesial Babylon, while 18 is about literal Babylon. And the Catholic Church will be the world church. During that time between 1945 and 1948, you come on down a little bit after World War II, a group of nations, Luxembourg, I think Austria, and the Netherlands, went together and started a trade business, which later 7 more countries joined, and that developed into the European Common Market. And of course, the European Common Market purpose was to have one currency, one citizenship, and they wanted to have one language. They worked on that, but that's been a failure. And so we come on down and we come in here to the 24th chapter of Matthew in verse 3, and Jesus said, as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, tell us, when shall these things be? That was the discussion about the destruction of the temple. And what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? You notice the first thing he said was, many will come in my name, saying, I am Christ. The New Age people do that. That movie that Shirley MacLaine made shows her standing on the edge of the ocean there, and she holds her hands out like this, and she says 3 times, I am God. They believe that man will take a quantum leap from manhood into godhood. And they are the people that the Lord surely was speaking about. But he goes on and gives many things. And we'll give you some of those things. I think the most important thing that we can look at that's been fulfilled in our lifetime, that is us older people, was in 1948, Israel, May the 14th, 1948, became a nation again. Now, do you realize what a tremendous miracle that was? No one else, sorry about that. No one else in this world has ever duplicated that. And there was prophecy made, like the 38th chapter of Ezekiel, that was made when Israel was out of her land. But God knew, and God said, these people are going to come home. Amazing. They're God's covenant people. In Ezekiel 37, there's the gathering of the dry bones, which is the nation of Israel. But let me turn you over to the 23rd chapter of Jeremiah, and I want to show you a verse that's rather interesting. Jeremiah chapter 23. And he said, we'll pick up in verse 7. He said, therefore, behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that they shall no more say, the Lord liveth, which brought up the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt. But the Lord liveth, which brought up and which led the seed of the house of Israel out of the north country, and from all countries whither I had driven them, and they shall dwell in their own land. This was the prophecy that Jeremiah made, and that has come true. The biggest, greatest, most noticeable thing is the Jews going home. And then you can read things in Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 10, 11, Jeremiah 24, 6, how that he'll plant them there and they'll not be plucked up, and they won't be plucked up until the middle of the tribulation, when they'll flee to Petra, the Red Rock city. And so, when shall these things be? What will be the sign of your coming? I would think that this thing with Israel should make us realize we're looking at the Lord's return. Now let me say this, and this is something we need to get. His return is imminent. Means he could come at any moment. Nothing has to be fulfilled. Someone said, well, they've got to build the temple yet, and there has to be the war that Ezekiel 38 talks about take place first before the Lord will come. The Bible doesn't teach that. The Lord could come and those things could take place after he comes. His coming is imminent, can happen. In fact, he said, I will come in an hour that you think not. So it's very interesting. Now, let's go on over to the 13th chapter of Mark, and we will take a look at what he says there about the nation of Israel. And we pick up here on the parable of the fig tree. Mark chapter 13. Come on over to the 28th verse. He said, now learn a parable of the fig tree. When her branch is yet tender and putteth forth leaves, you know that summer is near. It hadn't been very many days ago, actually, that we leafed out around this part of the country. A couple weeks ago, at the most. So he said, learn a parable. And then he said, so ye in like manner, when ye shall see these things come to pass, know that it is nigh, know that it is near, even at the doors. Verily means very important, or truly, truly. I say unto you that this generation, and you say, well, what's the definition of this generation? I think the emphasis is here. He's saying this generation that's alive, when you see Israel become a nation, and you see it thriving and growing and surviving, this generation, that's us, shall not pass till all these things be done. What should that tell us? I believe it would tell me this. We need to reach our loved ones. We need to reach our family. After I got right with the Lord, my wife and me were newly married, and I lived in a little mobile home. It was 8 foot wide, 40 foot long, or something like that. I had a dream. Now, I don't put emphasis on dreams, but this thing was so real. I had a dream, and I was in a funeral home. I didn't know where it was, but there was a casket down here. And I walked down and looked in that casket, and guess who was in the casket? My daddy. I woke up and I sat on the side of the bed, and I wept for a little while. And I said, Lord, help me. I want to make sure that my dad's saved. With the Lord's coming, looking this real and this close, we've got to reach our families, our friends, our neighbors. We've got to win them to the Lord. Something we must take in serious consideration. And so this generation, he said, will not pass till all these things are done. And then I think another thing that we could look at is the rise of Russia. Russia came to power after World War II, and actually before that. And God has so situated the earth. Jerusalem, the Lord said, he said, is my city. And Ezekiel 5:5. You want to write that verse down if you want to do any research on this. Ezekiel 5:5. He tells how he has placed Jerusalem in the midst of the nations. And when you talk about north of here, north of there, someone might say, well, north of where? North of Israel. North of Israel lies Russia. And it talks in Ezekiel how she will come out of the north parts, her and her allies, and it will be in the latter times, the latter days. We see that. 16th verse of that 38th chapter of Ezekiel says the latter days. And that's when that war in Russia or in Ezekiel takes place. And at one time, I don't know if it's still true or not now, but at one time, the largest horse-producing country in the world was Russia. And when I read Ezekiel 38, they come on horses with primitive type weapons. And people might say, well, how could this be? This has to be at another time. It's already happened. No, it could be very possible, because how many of you know what an EMP is? Let me see your hands. Electronic magnetic pulse. They can let off a bomb in the atmosphere. What does it do then? Somebody tell me. What? Kills all electronic battery driven so on devices and so on, right? So very well could be. We're in the last days. Now let's move on. We have also very present in these days, in this last time, the evidence of the wild man. And well, hold him down. Don't let him run off. Hold him down then. But let's go over to Genesis chapter, I get the right verse, or chapter 16. Genesis chapter 16. And this tells us something. And the wild man is present today in the world very, very, very much. And it all goes back about 4,000 years to a time with Esau and Jacob. Okay. Got my Bible crinkled up here and things that cause me a little bit of problem. Okay. Genesis 16, starting at verse 11. It says this. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, Behold, thou art with child, and shalt bear a son, and shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord hath heard thy affliction. And of course, he is the father of the Arab or mostly Muslim people in the world today. These people are really big enemies to Israel. There's never been hatred like the hatred that's over there. There's hatred that you can't describe with words. I didn't see some of those videos when they went in that early hour of the morning and killed about 1,200 Jews, what they did to the babies and women and children was unspeakable. He's the wild man. And I was thinking, I might have another reference. In chapter 12 of Genesis, it said, Now the Lord said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee and bless, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and I will curse them that curse him that curseth thee. And in thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed. It's definitely talking about Israel. But these people are against the nation of Israel. That's what's going on in that war right now. Somebody asked me, do you think there'll be another two-state situation where the Palestinians right there with Israel? I don't think Israel's going to tolerate it again, because for 20 years they have suffered and suffered and suffered and suffered. People are digging holes under the city, coming up and firing rockets off when they can, and all this has been going on. They're tired of living that way. Wouldn't you be? So there's the presence of the wild man. Now, things are advancing. In Daniel 12:4, he said, knowledge will increase, men will run to and fro. We've never had a day of travel like we have now, and we never had a day of the increase of knowledge. You can get on the internet and pull up about anything. You can ask Google and you can get an answer question. Never has there ever been that kind of information. And Daniel 12:4 said, the day will come when there will be, men will run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. And then, of course, let's look at the means of travel. And Nahum 2:4 is a description of the automobile. It'd be bright and shiny and run like the lightnings. Jostle in the streets, it says. We see this today. These things have all come true in our lifetime. All come true. So we're at the time of the fullness of the Gentiles. Let's turn over to Romans 11:25. We're at the time of the fullness of the Gentiles. That book of Romans is like an airport book. Doctrinally, you can go there to about any doctrine. 11:25, it says, for I would not, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery. 11 great mysteries in the New Testament. 11 is the number of confusion. 12 is organization. Lest you should be wise in your own conceits, that blindness in part has happened to Israel. That was after they rejected Jesus. Then that blindness was sent on them. Blindness in part was sent to Israel. Not wise in your own conceits, that blindness in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in. The fullness of the Gentiles is the, here's what my Scofield Reference Bible said this, is the completion of the purpose of God in this age. It's the calling out among the Gentiles of a people for Christ's bride. That's the church. We're at that stage, the fullness of it's coming. I can remember when it was much easier to reach people than it is now. I'm in a place over there. I'm on a called Hillsborough Road. It's a country church, a Baptist church. And there's lots of Catholics over there. And they've been taught, when they see me coming, they start hollering, I'm good, I'm good, I don't need a thing, don't need a thing. One man was spraying the yard, shut his sprayer off. I said, well, I was giving away some really good gifts today, but if you're not interested, I'm sure your neighbors will take them. He shut his sprayer off, and I said that, and he was looking like, did I make a mistake? Is he really giving something? What's he got? What's that he's got? He's carrying something. And I got in the car, and as I was going down the road, I waved at him, and he was still trying to see. But I don't mean to be unkind when I say this, but those people can be downright mean. I've been cussed, discussed, and run off numerous times. I had a man in church that had been saved about a year. he said, I'll go visiting with you. I said, good, we'll go Saturday. And boy, the devil saw to it that we had the worst day of visitation I'd had in about 20 years. I mean, it was absolutely the worst day. And we got back to church and got ready to drop him off at his car. And I said, Josh, how'd you like to do this all the time? He said, no. In fact, he said, I don't want to do it anywhere near in the future near again. But we're at the close of this dispensation. Things are changing. People's getting harder, meaner, tougher, harder to reach. I knew a lot of the old guys. I knew Ford Porter. He was on the board that ordained me, wrote that little tract, God's Simple Plan of Salvation. I knew lots and lots of the older guys, Carlisle Scott. I knew Dale Fasenfeld personally. Dr. Dale Fasenfeld. The only man I ever knew personally could say he had over 1,000 people saved in one revival meeting. You don't see that today. So the fullness of the Gentiles. How about demonic activity? Has that increased any? 1 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 1 said, this know also that in these latter times many will depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils. That has happened. Had you ever seen a time when you thought that people would worship the devil? It's a very real thing today. How about this? In the book of Genesis 24:37, it said, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be again in the coming of the Son of Man. In other words, things that happened in Noah's day will happen in our day before the Lord comes. What was one of the outstanding things in that day? Sex perversion. We see things today that I went to a board meeting that a school had, and I said to a teenage girl there, I said, where's the men's restroom? And she looked at me like, are you stupid? They all use the same restroom. Wasn't no men's restroom. Girls, boys, they all go to the same restroom. They have books in the school. Horrible books. One book talks about raping a child, child molestation, child pornography. There and anywhere, at any time, children need to learn this. That's something that don't need to be in the school. Something else about Noah's day, in chapter 6 and verse 11 and verse 13, and the earth was filled with violence. Violent time. What do you think about these school rebellion protests? They arrested numbers of those people and found out that half of them were not college students, but paid protesters. Come in from somewhere to protest America and in favor of Hamas. David Victor Hans, I think's his name, said this is not a protest group, but a death squad. A day of violence and sex perversion. Now, let me turn you over to 2 Peter. And we'll turn over there and look at chapter 3. Chapter 3, and verse 4 through 9. The context of this portion of Scripture is about the Lord's coming and saying, where is the promises or the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of the creation. For this they willingly are ignorant of. And I have never seen as much inflicted willing ignorance as there is today. It's abundant. They willingly are ignorant of that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water, whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. But the heavens and the earth, which are now, by the same word, are kept in store, reserved unto far against the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men. But, beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, that one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years has one day. What does he mean by that? There isn't many times in the New Testament the word ignorance is used. I think only about 6 times. But he said, be not ignorant of this one thing. Here's what we're looking at. Look at that again. Be not ignorant of this one thing, that one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is one day. How many days was God in creating the earth? 6 days. The 7th day, he rested. You have 6 dispensations before the 1,000-year reign. You have the dispensation of innocence, conscience, human government, covenant or promise, law, and where we are today, grace. This is the last of those 6 dispensations. And he said, be not ignorant. So it's like God has allotted the earth 6,000 years of man's time. And then the 7th one will be the 1,000-year reign. From the Garden of Eden to the cross, 4,000 years. From the cross up to now, approximately 2,000. 6,000 years, 6 days, we're at the end. One of these days, we'll hear the shout. Revelation 4:1. A door in heaven is going to open and a voice will say, come up hither. That's why we need to do all we can do now. Not next week, not next year, next month. Now we need to do something. Because his coming could take place any time. It's so important. Let me give you a real modern thing that's happened in our lifetime. You look at Revelation chapter 11 and verse 9, and you see the 2 witnesses. I believe the 2 witnesses will be Elijah and Moses. That's who I think. You've got a right to be wrong and believe something else. And I say that jokingly. But their bodies are lying in the streets of Jerusalem dead. And all the world sees it. Could that have happened 50 years ago? No. Why can it happen today? Because of satellite and television. Right? Another thing that's happened in our lifetime. Another thing shows you you're at the end. And I'll be honest with you, I'm glad. I had an old friend back in Muncie. I'd go see him every so often. I remember one evening he said, son, don't leave. I don't have anybody to talk to. I want to talk. So I sat down and I basically listened. He talked for about an hour. But he said to me one day, he said, I don't have much time. He said, I'm going to be gone probably within a week. And he did. He died within that week. And he said something I'll never forget. He looked at me and he said, I'll be waiting for you. I'll be waiting for you. His name was Lonnie, and I said, Lonnie, I'll be coming. I'll be coming. Boy, it's so important. Your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, your family goes to heaven. I believe this. Someone said, if we could uncap hell and look into night, some of us would lose our sanity. We'd never sleep right again. That's the truth. What a wonderful, marvelous thing God provided when He died for us and paid for our sins, and when we can accept Him as Lord and Savior. What a wonderful, marvelous thing. A missionary on the field was trying to tell the natives how that Christ died for them, and they didn't seem to be able to get it. And finally, he put together a little round circle of leaves. And he found a worm, and he put that worm in the middle of those leaves, and he pushed them in to where they were getting close to the worm, and he lit it on fire. And the worm was okay till the fire got closer, and he's going back and forth, twitching, trying to roll from it and get away from it. He reached down and picked him up, and he said, that's what Christ did for you when He died on Calvary. When He shed His blood, He paid for your sins. He saved you from the fire. He saved you from a lost state. We need to shed the light. I ask people, how many of you shed tears in the last week for loved ones or lost neighbors? When you ask people that, almost no one ever raised their hand and says, I have. We need to be that concerned. We're at the end. One of these days, the Lord's going to come. I'll stop there. You want to have questions and answers? Okay. Any of you, if you got a question, don't feel like it's dumb now, because it's not to you. And if you got a question, just ask, and we'll see if we can help you.
You said, can you grab the mic?
I think it's right below in my
There you go.
Yeah, like a flashlight later.
It's not
It looked like it for a minute.
questions
Now,
now?
not all of you at one time. Take one at a time. You got a question you want to ask, feel free to ask it.
We've mentioned other countries. Where do you see the United States in this?
If the Lord don't change my mind, tomorrow night I'm going to preach on America and Bible prophecy and God and American history. That's a very interesting thing. America definitely was started by God. Jesus came to the Pharisees, religious crowd, Matthew 21:43. And He said, I am going to take the kingdom of God from you and give it to a nation, not nations, but nations singular, bringing forth the fruits thereof. I have no doubt that nation was America. Too many things point to it. Loads and loads of things point to it. We were in the beginning back there at a crucial time in history for the people of the world, but we're not in the end. We're not mentioned. So it would seem we're going to have things happen to us that sort of nullifies us. Anybody else? Do you think that we will go financially broke?
I have a question too. Where, up here, where do you find China's role in the end times?
You know, the Bible talks about the drying up of the Euphrates River, and it says making way for the kings of the east. And that will include China. They will march with the Antichrist to the Battle of Armageddon. The Battle of Armageddon means the Mount of Slaughter. And that's when Jesus comes back with the army from heaven. And at his appearance, it won't be a long, drawn-out battle or anything. All he has to do is just simply show up. And 2 Thessalonians said they were destroyed by the brightness of his coming. And it works this way. Mere man cannot look on God in the fullness of his glory. And he will come back in the fullness of his glory. And the armies of the world gathered outside there from Jerusalem at Megiddo in the valley will be destroyed in a moment. The blood will run up to the bridle of a horse's rein. The 14th chapter of Zechariah said that it describes it in the 14th chapter that their flesh will consume away of their bodies. A good question. Anybody else?
I have one. I don't know if we'll all have an answer or not. My question is who is Israel? Is the Israel that we see in the Bible throughout the entire Old Testament the same as the Israel that we see in our world today, where the war is and everything? The reason, I ask that question to myself even, is to be Jewish can mean several things. It can mean that you're of a bloodline that makes you Jewish, or it can mean that you are religiously Jewish. People convert to Judaism and become Jewish. Or it can mean both, really. And all through the Old Testament, we see that God's people are required of Him to have obedience to Him. We see over and over and over that, starting right from the Garden of Eden, there's a blessing, there's a disobedience, there's a punishment, there's a returning to that obedience, and it's kind of wash, rinse, repeat throughout the entire Old Testament. What's happening in our world today with the Zionists and the overtaking of enclaves in other parts of the land seems to me to be more of a political happening than it is. It doesn't seem to have any religious aspect of obedience to God, which brings me back to my thought and question of who is Israel?
I don't know how the Lord will look at it. He doesn't give us any information as to dividing those who become Jews and those who have been Jews for bloodline from the beginning. He doesn't give us any statements about making a difference in that.
Do you feel what's happening in the land of Israel today is the Zionists is more of a political faction than a religious faction? And how does that kind of
it is.
fit into the Old Testament, speaking of Israel?
It is probably more political than religious. But they will be going more and more and more toward Him by events and things that happen. They will be drawn more and more toward Him. And then, of course, it will reach the place where the latter part Isaiah said, a nation will be born in a day, and they will turn to him and realize that who he is. There in the latter time of the tribulation, they will realize. It's a good question. And go ahead.
Where do you stand on pre-trib, mid-trib, or post-trib? I mean, there's a lot of reasons for a number of them. And I'm not sure where I stand.
Well, I couldn't hear what she said.
Mid-trib, post-trib, pre-trib, rapture.
Okay. The Bible definitely teaches the Lord will come before the tribulation. You know, if you'll stop and look, the tribulation is divided up into two parts, tribulation and then great tribulation. It will be in the middle half of the tribulation that the two witnesses are killed, because 2 Thessalonians 2, 3, 4 talks about how the Antichrist will enter into the temple declaring he is God. So people talk about the wrath of man and the wrath of God. I don't see how you could get much worse. The first half of the tribulation is about as horrible as you'd ever want to deal with. Something like a fourth of the inhabitants of the earth are killed. In that time, it is terrible. Demonic beings are loosed on the earth, and there's war and there's every bad thing. The church will not be subjected to that. The church is the bride of Christ. He's not going to subject his bride to that. And chapter 4 and verse 1 is where the rapture takes place. And then from 4 to 22, okay, chapter 1 to 4, chapter 4 is past and present. And 4 to 22 is all future. And the church is not mentioned there until the 19th chapter of Revelation, where the marriage of Christ is to the bride. So thank God we won't go through, as the church, any part of that. This gentleman up here had his hand up too. Go ahead.
We as adults can sit here and listen and follow the facts that you come across with. What about our children? Our 3-year-olds, our 1-year-olds, they're strictly our responsibility. If this happens.
Are we responsible for our children? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
You mean to be saved?
Prepare them. But they're so young.
Yeah, we have a certain amount of responsibility to raise them up in the nurture. Ephesians chapter 6, that in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And children should listen to their parents and obey their parents. Okay, go ahead.
It is now said that there's more Jews in the United States than there is in Israel. So what does that figure? They're not going to be going, Jews are not going to be flocking back to Israel with the violence going on over there, even though, like you said, the Jews would be going back to Israel.
Right.
But it doesn't seem now that, rational that with the violence going on over there, that the Jews in the United States will be going back to Israel.
Well, you know, I wouldn't want to go back over there. But many of them have gone back because they were actually drawn. Something drew them to come back there. They were drawn to come back. And they don't all have to go back there to fulfill the Bible at all. Many of them are here for business purposes. They're here to make money. And they have a special blessing on them more than other people from an earthly benefit of making money. You know, the Bible said, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. And really it comes down to this: as Jerusalem goes, so goes the world. Anybody, anyone else?
Sure.
Go ahead.
So I had one for you real quick. You and I were chatting before we started, just talking about, this area, Niagara Bible Conference and so this was known for a lot of the prophecy conferences, a lot of the work done, some of the, charts and things we made were all done in this area of the United States. And I'll just say there's been, this is the first prophecy conference I've heard of in many years, right? So kind of getting to the question, it does not seem like folks are studying the prophecies of the Bible anymore. And it also seems that folks don't tend to know the Bible or believe the Bible anymore. Is that the chicken or the egg, or is it both all together? I mean, why aren't we looking at the prophecies? Why aren't we looking at what the Bible says? And does one influence the other or vice versa? Do you have any opinion about that?
That's a good thought. I was trying to think of the verse. I think it's Amos 9:11. Said the days will come when there's a famine in the land, not of bread nor thirst, but of hearing the words of God. And I got to, many times early in the morning, I get up, maybe go to the bathroom, come back, and it seems like the Spirit of God comes and we meet. And I sometimes 2 or 3 hours just praying and thinking about things. And there's been many times when the Lord has really spoke to me and shown me some things. The other morning, God spoke to me about the apostasy. And the book of Jude is the 26th book in the New Testament. 13 is the number of apostasy. 26 is 2 times 13. It's about apostasy. And it's like the vestibule before the main auditorium. That's the way that book of Jude is. But when I get to looking at that, I come to the conclusion that the churches have changed so much. Doctrine's been changed. Well, let me start. The United Methodists, the Wesleyans, American Baptist, some organizations, some groups, have all going along the wayside, making it sound like it's okay to have a homosexual pastor. It's okay to have same-sex marriages. What did all these churches and all these groups have in common? I'll tell you one thing they had in common. They left the King James Bible. You say, well, there's nothing wrong with these other versions, but let me be real honest with you. You can name all in the American Standard Version, the NIV, the EIU, whole bunch of these versions. And it's like God said, okay, you leave my word, I'm taking my blessing. When you read that last chapter of Revelation, there's a serious statement made. He said, don't change this. Don't add to it. In other words, this book can correct us, but we can't correct it. And when we get to doing that, we're in trouble. We've moved away from God. And God removes His blessing, and you end up in that kind of a mess. I'm convinced that that's part of it. Part of what happens to our churches. Okay. I forgot what you had more to it. You had a different look.
Okay. I guess what I was trying to say is this area was known for being the people that, this was all the folks that were writing and, reaching out to the world, seemed to come from, the northeast U.S. and all,
At one time, they had great revivals in this area, this part of the country. How many of you know who Charles Finney was? Charles Finney. Could we have revival today? I'm convinced the local church could have revival. Where I'm at, I'm praying for revival. I'm praying for the real thing. I'm praying that we will have a lot of people saved. We would affect that area, the area in town, and that wicked school system would be changed. But as far as having a national awakening, I don't see that. And the days are going to get bad. Jesus said in John 9:4, I must work the works of him that sent me while it is yet day. For the night cometh, in other words, the time of spiritual darkness, when no man can work. And Paul said in 2 Timothy 3:1, know this also, that in these last days perilous times shall come. And you go on and you read that chapter, and he talks about ever learning but never able to come to knowledge of the truth. We've put more emphasis today on education than we have spiritual truth. Nothing wrong with education, but you can't leave off spiritual truth. But in that last chapter of Revelation, he said, if you change this book, I'm going to take your part out of the book of life. Didn't say they'd be lost, but your part. In other words, you end up with no rewards. Serious thing. I've spent all of my life, from the time I was 23 or 4 years old, trying to do something for the Lord. Anyone else? Question? Anybody want to comment on what I've just said? Not everybody at once. You heard about the protest meeting they had, didn't you? Protest leaders said, I said the only way they're going to listen to us, one of us has to set himself on fire. Any volunteers? Total quietness. He looked around, saw a little guy standing over. He said, how about you? The little guy, he was put on the spot. He was stuttering around. He said, man, he said, I was with you when you had that lockout. No, he said, I was with you when you had that walkout. But he said, I was not with you on this cookout. All right. Anyone else before we close? Brother, come up here and close out.